Millionaire CEO abandons pregnant wife. 6 years later, he sees her begging with 4 5-year-old boys who look exactly like him. Before we begin, just know, no matter where you are in the world, I'm glad you're here. The sleek glass tower of Harrison Enterprises pierced the Seattle skyline like a monument to ambition. On the 52nd floor, Blake Harrison stood alone, gazing out over the city he'd conquered. At just 36, his lean frame and sharp features betrayed little of the weight he carried. A $3 billion acquisition had just been finalized, expanding his already vast empire. "Mr. Harrison," his assistant's voice interrupted through the intercom. "The board is waiting for your statement." Blake straightened his custom Italian suit and squared his shoulders. His reflection in the window showed a man with everything and nothing at all. "Tell them I'll be right there," he replied, his voice controlled and measured as always. 14 years ago, Blake had been a grieving 22-year-old with nothing but determination and the inheritance from his parents' unexpected death. What began as a tech startup in his garage had grown into one of the most diversified corporations in the country. The business magazines called him brilliant. Forbes listed him among the youngest billionaires in America. Success by every measurable standard. Yet as Blake made his way to the conference room, memories flickered like old film. His sister Margaret, 8 years his senior, had stepped in as both business advisor and surrogate parent after their parents' accident. "Never show weakness, Blake," she would say. "Sentiment is a luxury we can't afford." The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 12 faces looked to him with a mixture of respect and fear. The acquisition meant another 5,000 employees would now answer to Harrison Enterprises. 5,000 lives under his responsibility. "Congratulations are in order," said Richard Vernon, the oldest board member. "Your parents would have been proud." Blake nodded, accepting the praise with practiced humility, though the mention of his parents still created a hollow feeling in his chest. Would they have been proud? Or would they have questioned what he'd sacrificed to get here? 8 years earlier, at 28, he had married Natalie, a graphic designer with wild curls and a laugh that could light up even his darkest moods. For 2 brief years, he had glimpsed what happiness might look like. Then came the arguments about his work schedule, his priorities. Margaret's whispered concerns that Natalie was using him for his money. The divorce had been quick and merciless, like everything else in Blake's world. As he delivered his prepared remarks about synergy and market expansion, his mind drifted to the last time he'd seen Natalie. The hurt in her eyes. The words he couldn't take back. "This acquisition represents not just growth but our commitment to excellence," Blake concluded, bringing himself back to the present. Applause echoed around the table. Hours later, after the champagne had been poured and the congratulations accepted, Blake returned to his penthouse alone. The space was immaculate, all clean lines, modern art, and empty silence. No photographs adorned the walls. No evidence of a life beyond work. He loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more decisions, more wealth accumulation. And for what? The empire he'd built felt increasingly hollow with each passing year. His phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. "Brilliant work today. Father would have been impressed." Blake didn't respond. Instead, he walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights below. Somewhere out there, people were sharing meals, laughing together, living lives uncomplicated by billions of dollars and the weight of legacy. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and closed his eyes. The man who had everything had never felt more alone. Blake rarely ventured downtown on weekends, preferring the isolation of his penthouse or the controlled environment of his office. But something had pulled him to the Pike Place Market that Saturday morning. Perhaps the need to be surrounded by normal life, even as an observer. He moved through the crowds anonymously, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater instead of his usual tailored suits. The vibrant energy of the market, vendors calling out, tourists haggling, musicians playing, felt like a different world from the sterile corporate environment he inhabited daily. That's when he saw her. Natalie stood behind, a small table displaying handmade jewelry and art pieces. Her once wild curls were now pulled back in a practical ponytail. her face thinner than he remembered. But what struck Blake most was what surrounded her. 4 identical little boys, all about 5 years old, with dark hair and serious expressions that mirrored his own childhood photos. Time seemed to stop. Blake froze mid-step, causing a tourist to bump into him with a muttered apology. His mind raced with calculations. Their divorce had been finalized 6 years ago. Natalie had left when she was in her first trimester, a detail he'd never known. One of the boys looked up, meeting Blake's gaze with curious blue eyes, his eyes. The child tugged at Natalie's sleeve, pointing. When Natalie turned and saw Blake, the color drained from her face. She whispered something to the boys before slowly beginning to pack up their display, her movements deliberately measured, as though giving him time to approach or to walk away. "Mom, we just got here," one of the boys protested. "It's getting cold, Tyler," she replied softly. "We'll come back tomorrow." Blake's feet carried him forward before his brain could process what he was doing. Standing before the table, he found himself unable to form words. Natalie straightened, meeting his gaze directly. The soft warmth he remembered had been replaced by something harder, eyes that had seen too much struggle. "Hello, Blake," she said simply. "Natalie." His voice sounded foreign to his own ears. "These are my sons," she answered, placing protective hands on the shoulders of the 2 boys nearest to her. The implications crashed over him like a wave. 4 identical boys. His eyes, his jawline, the timing. Are they? He couldn't finish the question. "Yes," Natalie replied, her voice barely audible. "They're yours, but I was told I couldn't," Blake stammered, remembering the doctor's diagnosis after his college sports injury. "Severely reduced fertility. Not impossible," Natalie said, a hint of the old fire flashing in her eyes. "Apparently the odds were in our favor. 4 times over." The boys watched this exchange with solemn curiosity. One whispered to another, triggering a cascade of identical giggles that pierced Blake's heart. "What are their names, Itzari?" he asked, his throat tight. Natalie hesitated before answering. "Tyler, Ethan, Lucas, and Noah." Blake nodded, trying to match names to faces, to comprehend that these children were his flesh and blood. Children he never knew existed. Children who had grown for 5 years without him. "We need to talk," he said finally. "Yes," Natalie agreed, her expression guarded. "I suppose we do." As she finished packing up their table, Blake noticed the worn edges of her coat, the second-hand quality of the boys' clothes. His empire of billions, and here was his family, his sons, selling handmade trinkets on a cold Seattle morning. Nothing would ever be the same again. Blake's hands trembled as he dialed the number of Richard Jenkins, the former FBI agent who now handled Harrison Enterprises. "Most sensitive security matters." "I need a discreet investigation," Blake said without preamble. "No paper trail, no team, just you." "What's the target?" Jenkins asked, his voice professionally neutral. Blake hesitated. "Not a what, a who. My ex-wife, Natalie Harrison, or I suppose she's Natalie Carter again now." After arranging to meet Jenkins the following day, Blake sat in his home office surrounded by the artifacts of his success. Awards, financial reports, press clippings, all suddenly meaningless in the face of what he'd discovered. 4 sons. His sons, children who had existed for 5 years without his knowledge. Blake opened his laptop and searched for the medical records he'd never revisited. The diagnosis after his college rugby injury had been devastating to a 20-year-old. Severely reduced fertility due to trauma. But he'd mentally translated that to sterile over the years, perhaps as a way to avoid confronting the possibility of fatherhood. The file appeared on his screen. Patient shows significantly reduced sperm motility and count, making natural conception highly unlikely, though not impossible. Not impossible. The words mocked him now. Blake's mind raced back to the divorce. Natalie had seemed distant in those final months, often sick in the mornings. He'd attributed it to stress, to the growing gulf between them. How blind he had been. But why hadn't she told him about the pregnancy? Even if she'd believed he wanted nothing to do with her, surely she would have sought child support for 4 children. A memory surfaced, Margaret's voice, cool and calculating after Natalie had moved out. "I've handled everything." She signed. "The papers. Clean break, no contact, it's better this way." His sister had handled the divorce. The same sister who had warned him repeatedly that Natalie was only after his money. The same sister who managed his communications when he retreated into work after the separation. With growing unease, Blake searched his email archives. There, buried in a folder he rarely accessed, were messages from the months following the UTG
divorce. One from Margaret caught his attention. "I know you're hurting, Blake, but contacting her would be a mistake. Cut ties completely. Focus on the company. It's the legacy Mom and Dad would want."
"I've taken care of all communications with her lawyers, don't worry about anything." Blake's jaw tightened. Had Margaret intercepted messages from Natalie? Had she known about the pregnancy? His phone rang. "Jenkins. I've done some preliminary research," the investigator said. "Your ex-wife and 4 boys are living at the Sunshine Haven, a shelter for women and children in Belltown. She works part-time at a design firm and sells handmade jewelry on weekends. The boys attend kindergarten at Washington Elementary, a shelter. The mother of his children, living in a shelter while he occupied a penthouse with 5 empty bedrooms. There's something else," Jenkins continued. "The shelter is 3 months behind on their mortgage. They're facing eviction next month." Blake thanked him and hung up, his mind already formulating plans. But first he needed more answers. He called his former doctor, Dr. Williams, who sounded surprised to hear from him after so many years. "I need to know if anyone else requested information about my fertility diagnosis," Blake said. "Anyone at all." The doctor hesitated. "Patient confidentiality. I'm not asking about other patients. I'm asking who inquired about my medical information." A long pause followed. "Your sister called about 6 years ago. Said she was concerned about how you were handling the news. She wanted clarification on your diagnosis." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That while conception would be difficult, it wasn't impossible." She seemed disappointed with that answer. Blake felt cold anger rising. Margaret had deliberately misled him about his own medical condition. What else had she done? His next call was to the director of Sunshine Haven. "This is Blake Harrison. I'd like to volunteer at your shelter," he said, formulating his plan. He would get close to Natalie and the boys, not just to confirm what he already knew in his heart, but to understand what had happened and what kind of father his sons needed him to be. The truth was out there, buried under 6 years of lies. And Blake was determined to uncover every last bit of it. Blake Harrison had never filled out a volunteer application before. For a man accustomed to being courted by charities for donations rather than time, the experience was humbling. Background. Check. References. Availability schedule. He used his mother's maiden name, Blake Wilson, and listed the CFO of his charitable foundation as a reference, someone who would be discreet. Ruth Sanders, the director of Sunshine Haven, peered at him over reading glasses. At 60-something with silver hair and penetrating eyes, she seemed unimpressed by the well-dressed man sitting across from her. "Why do you want to volunteer here specifically, Mr. Wilson?" she asked. "Most men your age are looking to pad their resumes with more prestigious organizations." Blake had prepared for this. "My mother lived in a place like this when I was young," he said, a half-truth that tasted bitter. "I want to give back." Ruth studied him with a skepticism born from years of weeding out volunteers with savior complexes or hidden agendas. "We need help with building maintenance first," she said finally. "Painting, minor repairs. After that, we'll see." Blake nodded. "Whatever you need." The background check took 2 weeks, longer than he anticipated despite his discreet efforts to expedite it. 2 weeks of imagining his sons growing up without him, of Natalie struggling alone. 2 weeks of rehearsing what he would say when they inevitably crossed paths. His first day at the shelter, Blake wore worn jeans and a plain sweatshirt. He spent hours repairing leaky faucets and damaged drywall in the communal areas, careful to avoid the residential floors where Natalie and the boys might be. Ruth watched him like a hawk. "You know your way around tools," she observed during his lunch break. "My father taught me," Blake replied, another half-truth. His father had believed in understanding the fundamentals of every industry Harrison Enterprises touched, including construction. "We need more men like that around here," Ruth said. "These kids need to see that men can build things up, not just tear them down." It was nearly a week before Blake caught his first glimpse of the boys. They raced through the community room after school, 4 identical blurs of energy. Tyler, he learned from overhearing staff, was the natural leader. Ethan, the thinker. Lucas, the creative one. Noah, the peacemaker. Each with his own personality despite identical appearances. Blake was painting a hallway when Noah, he thought it was Noah, stopped to watch him. "You're doing it wrong," the boy said matter-of-factly. Blake paused. "How so?" "You're supposed to go up and down, not side to side. That's what Miss Ruth says." Blake adjusted his technique. "Like this?" Noah nodded approvingly. "Better. Are you new here?" "I've been volunteering for about a week. I'm Noah. I live here with my mom and brothers." "Nice to meet you, Noah. I'm Blake." Noah studied him with an intensity that seemed beyond his 5 years. "You have blue eyes like me and my brothers?" Blake's heart raced. "Do I? That's a coincidence." "Mom says there's no such thing as coincidences." Noah shrugged. "Just things we don't understand yet." Before Blake could respond, a voice called from down the hall, Natalie's voice. "Noah, it's time for homework." "Coming, Mom," Noah called back, then whispered to Blake. "She gets worried if she doesn't know where we are." "Bye, Mr. Blake." The bye. Boy dashed off, leaving Blake staring after him, paintbrush suspended in midair. Later that week, Ruth assigned Blake to help in the after-school program. "The kids like you," she said, "especially Natalie's boys." "Natalie?" Blake feigned ignorance. "Natalie Carter, single mother of quadruplets. Remarkable woman. Works part-time, makes jewelry, takes online classes, and still manages 4 5-year-olds. Those boys are the most well-behaved children we've had here, despite everything they've been through." Blake wanted to ask more, but held back. "Sounds impressive." "It is. She deserves better than what life's handed her." Ruth's gaze was pointed. She doesn't trust easily, especially around men. Her ex-husband was some rich hotshot who threw her out when things got tough. Blake flinched inwardly at the characterization. Is that what Natalie believed? That he'd thrown her out? That evening, as Blake helped the children with art projects, he felt Natalie's presence before he saw her. She stood in the doorway, frozen, her eyes locked on him. "Mr. Wilson has been helping us all week, Miss Carter," Ruth explained. "He's very good with the children." Natalie's expression was carefully neutral. "How nice." Their eyes met across the room. The silent acknowledgement passed between them. She knew exactly who he was and why he was there. What Blake couldn't read was whether she would expose him or allow this charade to continue. The game had begun, and Blake wasn't sure if he was the player or the played. Blake sat in Dr. Williams's waiting room, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. The receptionist had given him a curious look. Billionaires didn't typically wait in plastic chairs, thumbing through outdated magazines. "Mr. Harrison," Dr. Williams greeted him, extending a hand. "Let's talk in my office." The doctor's space was unchanged since Blake's last visit years ago. Medical degrees on the wall, family photos on the desk, the same worn leather chair creaking as Blake sat down. "I've pulled your old records," Dr. Williams said, opening a file. "Your injury in college resulted in reduced sperm count and motility. But as I told you then, natural conception wasn't impossible, just unlikely." "That's not how I remember it," Blake said quietly. Dr. Williams frowned. "I was very clear about the diagnosis. You seemed to understand at the time." "When my sister called you," Blake pressed, "what exactly did she say?" The doctor hesitated. "She expressed concern that the uncertainty of the diagnosis was causing you anxiety. She suggested it might be." kinder, to emphasize the unlikelihood rather than the possibility. Blake's stomach tightened. And what did you tell her? That I couldn't change a medical diagnosis for emotional comfort, that while the odds were low, they weren't zero. Dr. Williams removed his glasses. She was quite insistent that it would be better for you to believe conception was impossible. I refused, of course. Blake nodded, pieces falling into place. Did she ever mention my ex-wife to you? Not specifically, but she did call again after your divorce. She wanted to confirm that your medical records couldn't be accessed by anyone else. Dr. Williams paused. I got the impression she was concerned about someone making claims against you. On the drive back to his office, Blake called Jenkins. I need everything you can find on my sister's activities 6 years ago, he instructed. Phone records, emails, anything related to Natalie or the divorce. At Harrison Enterprises, Blake locked himself in his private office and began digging through old files. There, in his archived emails, he found what he was looking for: messages between Margaret and their family lawyer about the divorce settlement. Ensure the NDA is airtight, Margaret had written. If she ever approaches Blake about anything, she forfeits all settlement money. Blake had never authorized such terms. He'd been too consumed by work and hurt to review the details, trusting Margaret to handle it. Another email made his blood run cold. The pregnancy complicates things. She's refusing to sign without speaking to Blake directly. Handle it. They had known. They had known about the pregnancy and deliberately kept it from him. Blake's phone rang. Jenkins. You need to see this, the investigator said. I found Margaret's old phone records. Multiple calls to Natalie's employer at the time, right after the divorce was finalized. What kind of calls? Based on my interviews, your sister implied that Natalie was unstable and untrustworthy. The company fired Natalie shortly after. Blake closed his eyes, remembering Natalie's passion for her graphic design career. Margaret had destroyed that too. His computer pinged with an incoming email from Jenkins. Attached was an old surveillance photo of Natalie, visibly pregnant, sitting on a park bench. The date stamp showed it was taken 4 months after their divorce. Margaret had had Natalie followed, had photographic evidence of the pregnancy, yet said nothing. As the pieces aligned, Blake remembered more subtle clues. Margaret's insistence that he take an extended business trip during the divorce proceedings, her screening of his phone calls and mail for months afterward, claiming to protect him from journalists and gold diggers. His next discovery came from his company's financial records. A monthly payment to a storage facility, authorized by Margaret, starting around the time of the divorce. Blake drove there immediately. The facility manager recognized him. Your sister usually handles this unit, Mr. Harrison. Inside was a collection of items Blake had never seen, baby gifts addressed to Natalie that had been sent to their old address after she moved out. Letters from Natalie to Blake, never delivered. A sonogram with Harrison quadruplets, written in the corner. Quadruplets. The rarest form of multiple births. His sons had been medical miracles and he'd missed everything. Their birth, first steps, first words, because of Margaret's manipulations. One final item caught his eye. A small journal with Natalie's handwriting. The last entry read, He doesn't want us. Margaret made that clear. I won't force 4 children on a man who doesn't want to be their father. My boys deserve better than that. We'll make our own way. Blake sat on the cold concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of his sister's betrayal and the stolen years he could never reclaim. His phone vibrated, a text from Ruth at the shelter. Natalie knows who you are. Come tomorrow anyway. It's time you two talked. The truth was fully unearthed now, ugly and painful. But at least it was the truth. Blake arrived at Sunshine Haven the next morning, tension knotting his shoulders. Ruth met him at the entrance, her expression unreadable. She's in the garden, Ruth said simply. The boys are at school. You have 1 hour. The shelter's garden was a small oasis behind the building, a few raised vegetable beds, potted flowers, and a weathered bench where Natalie sat, her back straight and hands folded in her lap. I wondered how long you'd keep up the charade, she said without turning as Blake approached. He sat beside her, leaving careful space between them. I needed to understand what happened. 6 years later? Her voice was controlled, but Blake could hear the undercurrent of anger. You could have asked 6 years ago. I didn't know, Blake said quietly. About the pregnancy, about the boys. Margaret, don't. Natalie cut him off sharply. Don't blame everything on your sister. You made your choices too. Blake absorbed the rebuke. You're right. I chose to believe the worst about you. I chose to bury myself in work instead of fighting for our marriage. But Natalie, I swear I never knew about the children. She finally looked at him, searching his face. Whatever she saw there caused something to shift in her expression. The boys, she corrected softly. They're not just the children. They're Tyler, Ethan, Lucas, and Noah. They have personalities and fears and favorite colors. They've existed for 5 years without you knowing. But they've existed. Blake nodded, accepting the gentle reprimand. Tell me about them, please. Natalie sighed, looking out at the garden. Tyler is our leader. Stubborn, protective, always first to try anything new. Ethan analyzes everything. He takes apart his toys to see how they work. Lucas draws constantly. He sees beauty in things the rest of us miss. And Noah. Her voice softened. Noah feels everything so deeply. He's our peacemaker. They're remarkable, Blake said. You've done an incredible job with them. I didn't have a choice. The words weren't accusatory, just matter of fact. After I was fired from my design firm, I tried finding work in Seattle, but your sister's influence ran deep. I moved to Portland, found a job at a small agency. Then when I was 7 months pregnant, the doctors discovered it was quadruplets. Blake winced, imagining her going through that alone. The medical complications meant bed rest. I lost that job too. My parents helped as much as they could, but they were retired, living on a fixed income. Natalie's voice caught. They died in a car accident when the boys were 2. After that, I was truly on my own. Why didn't you contact me for support? Even if you thought I didn't want to be involved, your sister made it very clear. If I ever approached you for anything, I'd lose what little settlement I received. Natalie's laugh was hollow. And there was a non-disclosure agreement I apparently signed, though I don't remember agreeing to those terms. Blake felt sick. You didn't. Those were added without my knowledge. It doesn't matter now, Natalie said. When I lost my job during the recession 2 years ago, I had nowhere else to go. I came back to Seattle for a fresh start, not knowing you were still here. Ruth took us in when we had nothing. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of missed years and miscommunications between them. What do you want, Blake? Natalie finally asked. Why are you here now? I want to know my sons, he said simply. And I want to make amends, if that's even possible. They don't know about you, Natalie said. They've asked about their father, of course. I've told them he's someone who couldn't be part of our family, but that doesn't mean he's a bad person. Blake felt a rush of gratitude for her kindness in not demonizing him to their sons. I have something for you, Natalie said, reaching into her bag. She handed him a small box. Inside were 4 baby bracelets from the hospital, a lock of hair, from each boy, their birth certificates with the father's name left blank, and ultrasound images of 4 tiny forms. I kept these for them, she explained, in case they wanted to know someday. Blake struggled to speak past the lump in his throat. Thank you. This doesn't mean I trust you, Natalie clarified. You hurt me deeply, Blake. Whether you knew about the boys or not, you gave up on us easily. These children need stability. They've had enough disappointment. I understand, Blake said. I'll take this as slowly as you need. But I want to be in their lives, Natalie. I want to be their father, not just financially, but really be there. Start as Mr. Blake the volunteer, Natalie said. Let them get to know you first. We'll take small steps. As Blake left the garden, he felt both the weight of his past mistakes and a fragile hope for the future. Small steps toward redemption seemed appropriate for a journey that had begun with such enormous wrongs. 3 months passed with Blake volunteering at the shelter 3 times a week. He'd become a fixture in the after-school program, teaching the children basic woodworking and helping with homework. The boys had grown comfortable around him, each relating to him in their unique ways. Tyler remained cautious, studying Blake from a distance. Ethan bombarded him with questions about how things worked. Noah shared his drawings and small observations. And Lucas followed Blake like a shadow, absorbing everything he did with quiet fascination. It was Lucas who first reached out beyond the group dynamic. During a woodworking session, while the other children were finishing their projects, Lucas lingered at Blake's side. "Can you show me how to make the corners smooth again?" the boy asked, his small hands holding a wooden box he'd been working on. "Of course," Blake replied, guiding Lucas's hands with the sandpaper. "Gentle circles, see? Let the sandpaper do the work." As they worked side by side, Blake noticed Lucas studying his face with unusual intensity. "Mr. Blake, why do you look like us?" Lucas asked suddenly. The question caught Blake off guard. The other boys had gone to join a game in the corner, leaving just the 2 of them at the workbench. "What do you mean?" Blake asked carefully. "Your eyes are blue like ours, and when you think really hard you make the same face Ethan makes," Lucas demonstrated by furrowing his brow and pursing his lips, a mannerism Blake recognized from his own reflection. Before Blake could formulate a response, Lucas cried out. He'd caught his finger on a rough edge of wood, a small cut opening on his fingertip. Blood welled up and tears filled the boy's eyes. "It's okay," Blake soothed, instinctively pulling Lucas onto his lap and grabbing the first aid kit. "Let's clean it up. It looks worse than it is." As Blake carefully cleaned and bandaged the small wound, he murmured reassurances, the same words his own father had used when Blake skinned his knee as a child. Lucas's tears subsided, replaced by curious observation of Blake's methodical care. "There," Blake said, placing a small dinosaur bandage over the cut. "Good as new." Lucas examined his finger, then looked up at Blake with a wobbly smile. "Thanks, Mr. Blake." Natalie appeared in the doorway just as Lucas wrapped his arms around Blake's neck in a quick, spontaneous hug. Something flashed across her face, surprise, concern, and perhaps a touch of wistfulness. "Lucas, time for dinner," she called softly. The boy slid from Blake's lap. "Mr. Blake fixed my finger, Mom, and we made a treasure box." Natalie nodded, her eyes meeting Blake's over their son's head. "That was kind of him. Say thank you." "Already did," Lucas declared, racing past her with his wooden creation. When he was gone, Natalie approached the workbench. "You're good with him," she admitted. "With all of them." "They make it easy," Blake replied. "They're amazing kids." A moment of awkward silence stretched between them. "Lucas asked why I look like them," Blake said finally. Natalie tensed. "What did you say?" "Nothing yet." He cut his finger before I could respond. Blake met her gaze. "It's been 3 months, Natalie. They're starting to notice. Maybe it's time we—" "Not yet," she interrupted. "Please. They're just getting stable. Here. With school, with friends." As they were talking, Lucas returned, clutching something in his hand. "Mom, I forgot to show Mr. Blake my new trading card." He thrust the card toward Blake proudly. Blake examined the baseball card with appropriate appreciation, but Lucas wasn't watching the card. He was looking at Blake's phone, which had lit up with a notification. The screen showed a much younger Blake in a college rugby uniform. "You look like Tyler in that picture," Lucas observed, pointing at the phone. Natalie froze. Blake carefully put the phone away. "I used to play rugby in college," he explained. "What's rugby?" Lucas asked. "It's like football, but different rules," Blake explained. "I got hurt playing it once." "Is that how you got that scar?" Lucas pointed to the thin line on Blake's forearm. Blake nodded, surprised the boy had noticed such a detail. "Yes, it is. I have a scar too," Lucas said proudly, showing a small mark on his elbow. "From when I fell off the slide." Natalie touched Lucas's shoulder. Dinner, sweetheart, right now. After Lucas left, Natalie sighed. You see what's happening? They're connecting the dots. Would that be so terrible? Blake asked gently. It's not about terrible, it's about timing. Natalie's voice was strained. What if you decide this isn't what you want? What if your life gets busy again? They've already lost so much. I'm not going anywhere, Blake promised. I've rearranged my entire life for this, Natalie. I've stepped back from daily operations at the company. I'm here 3 days a week. I'm in this for the long haul. Natalie studied him, searching for signs of insincerity. Let me think about it, she finally said. They deserve to know the truth, but it needs to be done right. As Blake gathered his tools, he felt a cautious optimism. The bonds were forming, fragile threads connecting him to 4 boys who shared his blood but not yet his name. Each small moment, a bandaged finger, a shared mannerism noticed, was laying the foundation for something he'd never thought possible. A family. We found something, Jenkins said, placing a manila folder on Blake's desk. 4 months had passed since Blake discovered his sons, but his investigation into Margaret's actions had continued quietly in the background. Blake opened the folder to find email printouts, dozens of them, between Margaret and various companies where Natalie had applied for jobs after the divorce. Your sister contacted every design firm in Seattle, Jenkins explained. She implied that Natalie had stolen proprietary information from her previous employer and was under investigation. No charges were ever filed, of course, but the implication was enough. Blake felt a familiar anger burning in his chest. That's why Natalie couldn't find work here. There's more, Jenkins said, turning to the next set of documents. Bank records show your sister hired a private investigator to track Natalie for nearly 2 years after the separation. The surveillance reports were meticulous. Natalie's doctor appointments confirming the quadruplet pregnancy, her move to Portland, even photos of her leaving the hospital with 4 tiny bundles. Margaret had known everything, tracked every moment, and shared none of it with Blake. Why? Blake whispered, more to himself than Jenkins. Why go to such lengths? There's one more thing, Jenkins said hesitantly. About the shelter's financial troubles. Blake looked up sharply. What about them? The mortgage holder is a company called MBH Holdings. It's a shell corporation that traces back to a trust controlled by your sister. The revelation hit Blake like a physical blow. Are you saying Margaret owns the shelter's mortgage, that she's behind the eviction threat? Jenkins nodded. The original lender was facing bankruptcy last year. According to my sources, Margaret's company swooped in and purchased the debt portfolio that included Sunshine Haven. 3 months later, they began aggressive collection procedures specifically targeting the shelter. Blake sat back, mind racing. It couldn't be coincidence. Margaret must have discovered Natalie's location and deliberately acquired the mortgage to apply pressure. But why now, after all these years? Unless she had somehow learned about Blake's involvement with the shelter. I need everything you can find on MBH Holdings, Blake instructed. Every transaction, every communication, and Jenkins, this stays between us. After the investigator left, Blake opened his laptop to check something that had been nagging at him. There it was, the quarterly charitable giving report. 3 months ago, he had personally authorized a substantial anonymous donation to Sunshine Haven. The timing aligned perfectly with Margaret's acquisition of the mortgage. Someone in his organization had leaked that information to his sister. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Meeting with shelter board tonight. Eviction notice official. 60 days. He immediately called her. I just heard, he said when she answered. What can I do? Natalie sounded exhausted. Unless you have $300,000 to clear the mortgage arrears, not much. Ruth's meeting with potential donors, but it's not looking good. No, Natalie cut him off. We've talked about this. I don't want your money, Blake. This isn't about us, Blake argued. This is about all the families at the shelter. A long pause followed. I need to go. The boys are waiting. For dinner. Blake hung up, already formulating a plan. He wouldn't let Margaret win this round, not when so many vulnerable people would pay the price. In his home office that evening, Blake dug deeper into MBH Holdings. The company had acquired several distressed properties over the past year, but only pursued aggressive collection on Sunshine Haven. The others had been granted extensions or refinancing options. His phone rang, an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Harrison," a woman's voice said. "This is Ruth Sanders from Sunshine Haven." Blake tensed. "Ruth, is everything okay?" "No, it's not." Her voice was tight. "I've just learned that your sister is behind our eviction notice. Care to explain that?" "How did you—" "I have friends in real estate law," Ruth said flatly. "Took some digging, but we found the connection. Is this some kind of twisted game between you two? Using homeless families as pawns?" "Ruth, I had no idea until today," Blake said quickly. "I've been investigating Margaret's actions for months. This is just the latest in a pattern of interference." "So you say." Her skepticism was palpable. "Natalie trusted you. We all did." "I'm going to fix this," Blake promised. "The shelter won't be evicted. You have my word." "Your word doesn't mean much right now," Ruth replied. "Natalie was right. To be cautious about you. Harrison men make promises they don't keep." After Ruth hung up, Blake sat in stunned silence. The carefully built trust of 4 months, gone in an instant. He had to act quickly. He called his lawyer, authorizing him to create a new foundation with anonymous leadership. By morning, the EE Foundation would make an offer to purchase the Sunshine Haven mortgage from MBH Holdings at a premium that even Margaret couldn't refuse. As he worked through the night setting his plan in motion, Blake realized this was about more than saving the shelter. It was about countering years of Margaret's manipulation and proving, to Natalie, to Ruth, to his sons, and to himself, that he was not the man his sister had shaped him to be. The conspiracy was fully exposed now. The only question was whether he could undo the damage before it was too late. Margaret Harrison's corner office occupied the east wing of Harrison Enterprises, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Seattle. When Blake entered without knocking, she was on the phone, impeccably dressed as always in a tailored suit, her graying dark hair pulled into a tight chignon. "I'll call you back," she said smoothly, hanging up. "Blake, this is unexpected." He placed the MBH Holdings documents on her desk without a word. Margaret glanced at them, her expression unchanging. "I see Jenkins has been busy." 6 years, Margaret," Blake said, his voice dangerously quiet. 6 years of lies. "I protected you," she replied without hesitation. "That woman was after your money from the beginning. That woman is the mother of my children." Blake's hands clenched at his sides. "Children you knew about. Children you made sure I never met." Margaret's composure slipped for just a moment. "Everything I've done has been for this company. For our family legacy. Don't you dare talk about family." Blake's voice rose despite his efforts to control it. "You kept my sons from me. You deliberately sabotaged Natalie's career and now you're trying to evict an entire shelter just to get back at her?" "I didn't know she was at that particular shelter when I acquired the mortgage," Margaret said coolly. "That was just fortuitous timing. But once you found out, you accelerated the eviction proceedings." Blake shook his head in disgust. "How did you know I was volunteering there?" A thin smile crossed Margaret's face. "You think I don't monitor? Your calendar, your charitable donations? It's my job to know where the Harrison money goes." "Not anymore." Blake's words fell like stones. "You're fired, Margaret, effective immediately." For the first time, genuine shock registered on her face. "You can't be serious. I built this company with you. After Mom and Dad died, after they died, you stepped up." "I'll always be grateful for that," Blake acknowledged. "But somewhere along the way, you stopped protecting me and started controlling me, making decisions about my life that were never yours to make." Margaret stood, her composure returning. "You were 22, grieving, vulnerable. Natalie saw an opportunity, a young man set to inherit billions. She got pregnant to trap you." "With quadruplets?" Blake laughed bitterly. "That's quite a scheme." "I didn't know it was quadruplets," Margaret snapped, then froze, realizing her admission. "But you knew she was pregnant?" Blake pressed. You knew I was going to be a father and you deliberately kept that information from me. Margaret's face hardened. I did what was necessary. You weren't ready for fatherhood. The company needed your full attention. That wasn't your decision to make. Someone had to make it. Margaret's control finally shattered. You were too busy playing husband with a woman who wasn't good enough for you. Do you have any idea what I sacrificed for this family? I gave up everything. My own chance at marriage, children, to step in after our parents died, to raise you, to build this company. Blake saw, perhaps for the first time, the pain behind his sister's actions. You lost your fiancé to your friend. Margaret flinched. James left me for Victoria 2 weeks after the funeral. Said I was too focused on family responsibilities to build a life with him. So you decided no one deserves happiness? Blake asked quietly. Because yours was taken? I decided this company would be our legacy, Margaret replied, her voice steadying. Not some gold digger and her children. Blake felt a surge of protective anger. Those are my sons you're talking about. Your nephews. Something flickered in Margaret's eyes. Surprise, perhaps even a hint of regret. She glanced down at the surveillance photos spread across her desk. 4 boys, she murmured. Identical. Quadruplets. Identical. 5 years old. Despite everything, Blake found himself pulling out his phone, showing her a picture he'd taken at the shelter. Tyler, Ethan, Lucas, and Noah. Margaret stared at the image, her hard expression softening imperceptibly. They look like you did at that age. They're brilliant, Margaret. Kind, curious, resilient. Blake put the phone away. You would have loved them if you'd given yourself the chance. For a moment, something vulnerable showed in Margaret's face. Regret, perhaps, for what might have been. Then the mask returned. The board won't support your decision to remove me, she said coldly. I have allies. Perhaps, Blake conceded. But I have controlling interest and evidence of your misappropriation of company resources for personal vendettas. I don't want to destroy you, Margaret. Despite everything, you're still my sister. But I will protect my family, all of my family, from now on. He turned to leave, then paused. The shelter's mortgage will be paid in full by tomorrow. Stay away from Natalie and my sons, Margaret called after him. They'll never accept you, you know. You're a stranger to those boys. And Natalie will never forgive you for abandoning her. Blake stopped in the doorway. Maybe not. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn their forgiveness anyway. As he walked away, Blake felt a strange lightness. The confrontation had been inevitable, but now that it was done, he could focus on what truly mattered. Building a relationship with his sons and making amends to Natalie, if she would let him. The mask had fallen, revealing the painful truth behind years of manipulation, but with truth, however painful, came the possibility of healing. The picnic table in the shelter's garden had been set with special care, sandwiches cut into dinosaur shapes, fruit arranged in colorful patterns, and 4 small cups of chocolate pudding. Natalie had spent the morning preparing, her movements tense and precise. Are you sure about this? She asked Blake for the 10th time. No, he answered honestly. But I think it's time. The news about the shelter's mortgage being paid in full had reached Ruth yesterday. Though Blake had attempted to keep his involvement anonymous, Ruth had seen through the arrangement immediately. Trying to buy your way into their lives, she had asked him pointedly. Trying to right a wrong, Blake had replied. The shelter shouldn't suffer because of my family's issues. Ruth's approval wasn't easily won, but her stance had softened slightly. Natalie and the boys deserve stability, she'd conceded. Just make sure you're offering that, not just money. Now, as the afternoon sun warmed the garden, Blake heard the excited chatter of the boys returning from their morning at kindergarten. His heart raced as they burst into the garden, backpacks bouncing. Mom, we made volcanoes today, Tyler announced, then stopped short upon seeing Blake. Mr. Blake is here for lunch? Natalie nodded, her smile tight. Yes, we're having a special lunch today. There's something important we need to talk about. The boys settled around the table with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Noah immediately showed Blake his drawing of a dinosaur. Ethan examined the sandwiches with scientific curiosity. Lucas began arranging his fruit into patterns. Tyler watched Blake suspiciously. "Is the shelter closing?" Tyler asked suddenly. "Is that why we're having a meeting?" "No, sweetheart," Natalie assured him. "The shelter is staying open. In fact, someone has paid the mortgage, so everything is secure now." "Was it you?" Lucas asked Blake directly, his intuition as sharp as ever. Blake exchanged a glance with Natalie, who gave a slight nod. "Yes," Blake admitted. "But that's not why we're having this talk." "Are you leaving?" Noah asked, his lower lip trembling. "Slightly. Miss Ruth said volunteers don't stay forever." "No, I'm not leaving," Blake promised. "Actually, I'm hoping to be in your lives even more if that's okay with you." Tyler's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Natalie took a deep breath. "Boys, remember how you've asked me about your dad sometimes? And I've told you that he couldn't be part of our family when you were born?" 4 identical heads nodded solemnly. "Well," she continued carefully, "sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Sometimes they don't have all the information they need to make good choices." Blake felt a tightness in his chest as he watched the boys' expressions. They were so young, yet their eyes held a wisdom beyond their years, children who had faced uncertainty and change. "The truth is," Natalie said, "Mr. Blake is actually your father." A profound silence descended on the table. 4 pairs of blue eyes, his eyes, stared at him with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. "But," Ethan was the first to speak, his analytical mind working through the puzzle, "if you're our dad, why didn't you know us before? Why, did you say your name was Wilson?" "That's a fair question," Blake acknowledged. "I didn't know about you boys until I saw you and your mom at the market a few months ago. I should have known. That's the mistake part. But I didn't. And when I realized who you might be, I wanted to get to know you first to see if I could be a good father before telling you the truth." "So you lied?" Tyler stated flatly. Blake nodded. "Yes. And that was wrong of me. I'm sorry." "If you're our dad," Lucas asked, connecting dots as he always did, "is that why we look like you? Why we have the same eyes?" "Yes," Blake confirmed. "That's how genetics works. Children often look like their parents." Noah, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "Did you not want us before? Is that why you weren't here?" The innocent question cut Blake to the core. "No, Noah. I didn't know about you. If I had known, I would have been here from the very beginning." "Mom," Tyler turned to Natalie, seeking confirmation. "Is he really our dad?" Natalie nodded. "Yes, he is. And he's going to stay now?" Noah pressed. "Promise?" "I promise," Blake said solemnly. "I'm not going anywhere." Ethan, ever practical, had more questions. "Do we have to call you Dad now? Do we have to live with you? What about Mom?" "You can call me whatever makes you comfortable," Blake assured. Him. "And no one is taking you away from your mom. We're just adding me to your family, not replacing anyone." The boys exchanged looks, having one of those silent communications that identical siblings sometimes share. "I need to think about it," Tyler announced, clearly speaking for all of them. "That's fair," Blake nodded. "This is a lot to take in. You take all the time you need." As the meal continued with strained conversation, Blake noticed each boy processing the news in his own way. Tyler maintained his protective distance. Ethan observed Blake with new interest, as if recategorizing him in his mental database. Lucas kept glancing between Blake and his brothers, noting similarities. And Noah. Noah scooted his chair slightly, closer to Blake's, a small gesture that spoke volumes. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The summons arrived at Sunshine Haven exactly 1 week after Blake's revelation to the boys. Natalie's hands shook as she read the legal document. A petition for shared custody filed by Blake Harrison, seeking immediate and substantial parenting time with Tyler, Ethan, Lucas, and Noah Harrison. "Harrison?" she whispered, noting the changed, Surname. What is this, Blake? Blake, who had been helping the boys with an art project in the common room, looked up in confusion. What's wrong? Natalie thrust the papers at him. You're suing me for custody? After everything we discussed? Blake scanned the document, his face draining of color. I didn't file this, I swear, Natalie, I would never. It has your signature. She cut him off, pointing to the bottom of the page. Blake examined it closely. This isn't my signature, it's close, but... Realization dawned on his face. Margaret. Your sister is filing custody papers in your name? Natalie's voice was skeptical. She has access to my electronic signature for company documents. And she warned me she wouldn't go quietly. Blake pulled out his phone. I need to call my lawyer. But the damage was already done. The boys had stopped their painting, 4 identical faces registering the tension between the adults. Are you taking us away from Mom? Tyler asked, his young voice steady but his eyes betraying fear. No, Blake answered firmly. Never. This is a mistake that I'm going to fix right away. But fixing it proved more complicated than expected. Margaret had not only filed the custody petition, but had also contacted Child Protective Services with anonymous concerns about the boys' living conditions at the shelter. By afternoon, a social worker named Ms. Winters arrived to conduct an evaluation. This is standard procedure when concerns are raised, Ms. Winters explained, her tone professionally neutral as she interviewed Natalie. Especially when there's a custody dispute between parents. There is no dispute, Natalie insisted. This was filed fraudulently. Ms. Winters made a note. Mr. Harrison's financial resources would certainly provide more stability than your current living situation. How long have you been at this shelter? 2 years, Natalie acknowledged. But we're on a waiting list for subsidized housing. And before Mr. Harrison reappeared, what was your long-term plan for the boys? The questioning continued, painfully highlighting the stark contrast between Blake's resources and Natalie's struggles. When it was the boys' turn to be interviewed, they clung to Natalie, confused by the stranger asking about their home and parents. Meanwhile, Blake was fighting his own battle. His lawyer confirmed what he suspected. The custody filing was legally tenuous but would take time to dismiss. More concerning was the board meeting Margaret had called in his absence. She's making a play for control, his CFO warned by phone, claiming you're emotionally compromised and making rash decisions that threaten the company's stability. Blake arrived at the emergency board meeting to find Margaret perfectly composed, armed with a presentation titled Succession Planning. In times of crisis, my brother has recently discovered he has children, she addressed the board smoothly. While this is wonderful news personally, his sudden decisions to step back from daily operations, fire key executives, namely me, and divert substantial company resources to personal projects represent a concerning pattern. That's enough, Margaret, Blake interrupted. Board members, I apologize for this circus. My sister is retaliating because I removed her for cause, specifically, misusing company resources for personal vendettas and interfering in my private affairs. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances as the siblings faced off. Blake has been making emotional decisions, Margaret continued calmly, including paying off a $3 million mortgage for a homeless shelter where his children have been living in substandard conditions. The children have been well cared for, Blake countered. And my personal charitable giving is not board business. By evening, Blake was fighting on multiple fronts. The custody petition remained active despite his lawyer's efforts. Child Protective Services had scheduled a full family evaluation, and 3 board members had privately expressed concerns about his focus and judgment. When he finally returned to the shelter, Ruth met him at the door with cold fury. Social Services is questioning our entire operation because of you, she said. Families here are terrified their children will be taken away. Natalie and the boys are packing, ready to leave town again. What? No. Blake pushed past her, finding Natalie in their small room efficiently filling backpacks while the boys watched with solemn eyes. You can't leave, Blake pleaded. Running will only make things look worse. Staying looks worse, Natalie replied, her voice tight. I knew this would happen. I knew the minute you stepped back into our lives, everything would fall apart. Mom's crying at night, Noah said quietly. Like before when we had to leave. Portland. Blake knelt to the boy's level. I promise I'm going to fix this, all of it. That's what grown-ups always say, Tyler observed with a child's brutal honesty. But sometimes things stay broken. As Blake struggled to find words that could heal the damage Margaret had caused, his phone buzzed with a text from Jenkins. Found something. Margaret's assistant has copies of all your personal documents, including the original birth certificates for the boys that Natalie tried to send you years ago. Proof she intercepted communications. Coming to you now. Blake looked up at Natalie, determination replacing despair. I need you to trust me one more time. Margaret thinks she's won, but she's just given us exactly what we need to stop her for good. For the first time in their long, complicated history, Natalie and Blake found themselves truly united, not by love or even their shared children, but by a common enemy and the fierce determination to protect what mattered most. The Seattle family court building stood imposingly against the gray morning sky as Blake, Natalie, and their legal team arrived for the emergency hearing. 3 weeks of legal maneuvering had led to this moment. A judge would finally hear their case to dismiss the fraudulent custody petition and address Margaret's interference. Remember, Blake's attorney counseled, Judge Ramirez has a reputation for being thorough. She'll want to hear from everyone. Inside the courtroom, Margaret sat confidently beside her high-powered attorney. She offered Blake a thin smile that never reached her eyes. All rise for the Honorable Judge Elena Ramirez, the bailiff announced. The proceedings began with Margaret's attorney presenting a compelling narrative. A successful businessman discovering his children were being raised in a shelter, naturally, wanting to provide them with advantages their mother couldn't offer. My client's brother has means and resources, the attorney argued smoothly. The children would have private education, healthcare, stability, opportunities Ms. Carter simply cannot provide. When Blake's attorney presented the evidence of Margaret's forgery and interference, Judge Ramirez's expression remained impassive. These are serious allegations, Ms. Harrison, she noted. Forgery of legal documents is a criminal offense. Margaret's attorney quickly intervened. My client was acting out of concern for her nephews, perhaps overzealously but with good intentions. Judge Ramirez turned to Blake. Mr. Harrison, what custody arrangement are you actually seeking? Blake stood. Your Honor, I never filed for custody. I want to be part of my son's lives, but I fully respect Natalie's role as their mother. We were working on a co-parenting arrangement before my sister's interference. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Ms. Carter, your position? Natalie rose, her voice steady despite her nervousness. I've raised our sons alone for 5 years, not by choice, but because I believed Blake didn't want us. I'm not opposed to him being in their lives now, but this legal ambush has shaken my trust. The pivotal moment came when Ruth Sanders took the stand as a character witness. The shelter director spoke with the authority of her 30 years working with families in crisis. I was skeptical of Blake Harrison initially, Ruth admitted. Men of privilege often have savior complexes, but I've watched him spend months building genuine relationships with those boys, not buying their affection, but earning their trust through consistency and respect. When asked about Natalie, Ruth's voice softened. She's the most dedicated mother I've encountered in my career. Those boys are kind, well-adjusted, and thriving despite their circumstances, a testament to her parenting. Finally, Judge Ramirez spoke directly to Margaret. Ms. Harrison, while I understand family loyalty, your actions appear less about protecting your nephews and more about controlling your brother. The evidence of your systematic interference is troubling. After a brief recess, Judge Ramirez delivered her ruling. The custody petition was dismissed. Margaret was referred to the district attorney for potential charges of forgery. Most importantly, Blake and Natalie were ordered to develop a formal co-parenting plan that prioritized the children's stability. These boys deserve to know both their parents, the judge concluded, but transitions must be gradual and thoughtful. As they left the courtroom, Blake turned to Natalie. We won. The battle, maybe, Natalie replied cautiously. But we still have 4 confused little boys who need us to figure out what comes next. Blake nodded, understanding that the real work, the work of becoming a family in whatever form that took, was just beginning. A month after the court hearing, Blake stood outside the door of apartment 3B in a modest building near Volunteer Park. He adjusted the small potted plant in his hands, a housewarming gift that felt inadequate given the circumstances. "Are you coming in?" Natalie asked, holding the door open. "The boys are waiting." The apartment wasn't large, a 3-bedroom unit with simple furnishings, but it was clean, bright, and most importantly, theirs. After lengthy discussions, Blake had purchased the building through his new foundation and converted it into affordable housing. Sunshine Haven now operated it as transitional apartments for families ready for independence. "We picked our own beds," Noah announced proudly, taking Blake's hand to show him the bedroom he shared with Lucas. "Mine has dinosaurs." The boys had adjusted to their new reality with the resilience of children. They still called him Blake, not Dad, but the wariness in their eyes had gradually softened. In the small kitchen, Tyler was setting the table for dinner, their first meal together, in the new apartment. "Mom says you're staying for spaghetti," he informed Blake, his tone indicating this was still unusual but acceptable. "Thank you for including me," Blake replied, helping to place glasses on the table. Ethan watched this interaction from the doorway, his analytical mind still assessing the new family dynamic. "Are you going to have dinner with us every night now?" he asked. "Not every night," Blake explained, "but Tuesdays and Fridays and Sunday afternoons, if that's okay with all of you." The carefully negotiated schedule had been developed with a family therapist, consistent enough for bonding but not overwhelming for children still adjusting to the concept of a father. Dinner was a study in awkward pauses and tentative conversation. The boys shared stories from their new school, where they'd started just 2 weeks earlier. Blake listened intently, cherishing these glimpses into their lives while acutely aware of the years he'd missed. After the meal, as the boys cleared the table, a chore they performed with practiced efficiency, Natalie joined Blake on the small balcony overlooking the neighborhood. "It's starting to feel real," she said quietly. "This new life." Blake nodded. "Thank you for letting me be part of it." "You gave us stability without taking away our independence," Natalie acknowledged. "That matters." They had found a delicate balance. Blake provided financial support through a trust for the boys' education and health care, while Natalie maintained day-to-day parental authority. She had accepted a position with the foundation as a program coordinator, using her design skills to help shelter residents build marketable portfolios. "I spoke with Margaret yesterday," Blake said carefully. Natalie tensed. "And?" "She's in therapy, part of her plea agreement to avoid criminal charges." He sighed. "She asked about the boys. Do you think she'll ever be part of their lives?" "I don't know," Blake admitted. "That would be up to you and them when they're older." Later, as Blake prepared to leave, Lucas presented him with a drawing, 5 stick figures standing together. "It's our family," he explained. "See? That's you at the end." Blake swallowed the lump in his throat. "It's perfect, Lucas. Thank you." At the door, Natalie handed him a small envelope. Inside was a school photograph of all 4 boys, their identical faces arranged in varying expressions from serious to smiling. "For your desk," she said simply. "So they're with you when you're not here." Blake nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening his chest. As he drove home to his now less empty penthouse, Blake reflected on how much had changed in 8 months. The journey from isolated billionaire to part-time father of quadruplets had been neither smooth nor simple. The bridges between them all were still under construction, fragile spans built of tentative trust and cautious hope. But they were building them together, one small moment at a time. "Dad, watch this," Tyler called from across the baseball field, his small face determined as he gripped the bat. After 9 months, the word "dad" still felt new on the boys' tongues, used cautiously like testing thin ice. Blake gave a thumbs up, sharing a smile with Natalie, who sat beside him on the bleachers. Saturday morning Little League had become their ritual. All 4 boys played on the same team, distinguished by different colored cleats. "He's been practicing that swing all week," Natalie remarked. "At home, at school, at dinner." "Sounds familiar," Blake said. "I was obsessed with baseball at his age too." These moments of discovered similarity still surprised them both. The way Ethan furrowed his brow when concentrating, exactly like Blake. How Lucas could draw for hours, a talent he shared with Natalie. As Tyler connected with the ball, sending it soaring toward left field, Blake leapt to his feet, cheering. The boy's face lit up with pride, seeking out his father's approval as he raced to first base. It had been the most resistant of the 4 boys who had first breached the wall between them. Tyler, protective and skeptical, had gradually lowered his guard through these shared Saturday mornings, discovering a connection through a game they both loved. "We're still on for dinner tonight?" Blake asked as they gathered equipment after the game. "The boys are looking forward to it," Natalie confirmed. "Noah wants to show you his science project." Their co-parenting relationship had evolved into something neither could have imagined a year ago. Not romantic, but built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Natalie had flourished in her new role at the foundation, while Blake had restructured his company to allow more family time. As they loaded 4 tired but happy boys into Natalie's car, Blake reflected on how his definition of success had fundamentally changed. The empire he'd built now seemed hollow compared to the joy of watching his son hit his first baseball or helping with homework at the kitchen table. "See you at 6, Natalie said. Blake nodded, watching them drive away, not with the emptiness he'd once felt, but with anticipation of seeing them again soon. This was his new beginning. 1 year to the day after Blake first spotted Natalie and the boys at Pike Place Market, the Harrison Foundation held its inaugural fundraising gala. The grand ballroom sparkled with Seattle's elite, gathered to support the foundation's mission of providing stable housing for families in transition. Blake adjusted his tie nervously before stepping to the podium. In the front row sat Natalie, elegant in a simple blue dress she had designed herself, flanked by Ruth and the boys in matching suits, fidgeting but proud. "A year ago," Blake began, "I thought success meant acquisitions and market share. I lived in an empty penthouse surrounded by possessions but not people." He paused, meeting Natalie's supportive gaze. "Then one Saturday morning, my definition of success changed forever when I discovered what I'd been missing. My family." As Blake shared their story, carefully edited for privacy but honest about his own failings, he watched the 4 identical 6-year-old boys who had transformed his life. Tyler sat tall, protective as always. Ethan observed the crowd with analytical interest. Lucas sketched on his program. Noah beamed with unconditional warmth. "The Harrison Foundation isn't just about buildings," Blake continued. "It's about creating opportunities for families to stay together, to grow together, to overcome challenges together." After the speeches and the successful fundraising pledges, the formal event transitioned to a family-friendly celebration in the adjoining garden. Children of donors played alongside families from Sunshine Haven. The social barriers that typically divided them temporarily dissolved. Blake found a quiet moment with Natalie by the fountain. "The foundation's off to an incredible start," she said. 6 new transitional housing projects in 1 year. Blake nodded. "Your program for helping residents build professional portfolios has become our most successful initiative." They watched their sons playing tag with other children, their laughter carrying across the garden. "We did it," Natalie said softly. "We found our way through the mess." "You did most of the heavy lifting," Blake acknowledged. "For 5 years you were everything to them." "And now they have both of us," she replied. "In different homes, with different roles, but both fully present." Their romantic relationship had not rekindled. Too much had happened, and they had both changed too fundamentally. Instead, they had found something perhaps more valuable, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Natalie was dating a kind art teacher from the boys' school, while Blake had recently begun seeing a pediatrician he met through the foundation. A commotion at the garden entrance drew their attention. Margaret stood hesitantly at the threshold, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I invited her, Blake explained. She's been consistent with her therapy. She asked to meet them properly. Natalie tensed but nodded. It's your call. They should know their aunt eventually. Margaret approached cautiously, humbled by the legal consequences of her actions and the personal reckoning that followed. When she reached them, she spoke directly, to Natalie. I owe you an apology that can never be adequate, she said simply. But I am truly sorry for the harm I caused. Natalie studied her for a long moment before responding. They're remarkable boys. If you want to be in their lives, you'll need to earn their trust and mine. Margaret nodded, accepting the terms with unexpected grace. As the evening drew to a close, Blake gathered with Natalie and the boys for a photograph, their first official family portrait. They stood together not as a traditional family unit, but as something uniquely their own. Dad, are we still going fishing next weekend? Noah asked as they posed. Absolutely, Blake promised. All 5 of us. Later, as Blake drove home to his new house, a modest but warm home closer to the boys, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had lost an empire of glass and steel but gained a messy, complicated, beautiful family. His office, wall now displayed children's artwork rather than acquisition certificates. His weekends revolved around baseball games and science projects rather than board meetings. The man who had everything now actually did, not because of what he owned, but because of who he loved and who loved him in return. His sons would grow up knowing both their parents, each bringing different strengths to their upbringing. They would understand that family wasn't always perfect or traditional, but could be resilient and real. Blake Harrison, once defined by his billions, had finally found his true wealth in the bonds that no amount of money could buy. The empty empire had been filled at last, not with possessions or power, but with the messy miracle of family in all its imperfect glory.